Thanks a lot. It's great to have the opportunity to be down here today, and I've certainly enjoyed the conference so far. I'm Casse. I'm Development Manager at Fisher & Paykel Healthcare. I titled the presentation here Beyond the Backlog. And I really wanted to share 3 lessons that we've learned over the last few years of our Scrum journey at Fisher & Paykel that have really taken Agile to that next level for us and really helped us see some of the great benefits out of it. Where's this clicker thing here? Oh, there we go. So a little bit about me. I like to think of myself as a developer. My team might disagree with that, but my background's in software development. I started in embedded systems, communication systems, sort of assembler, C, C++, and then more recently into the more computer software side of things with C#, HTML, and CSS, and that kind of realm. So I try to keep my hand in there as much as I can. But my real title at Fisher & Paykel Healthcare is Development Manager. And I look after an area of F&P that we call informatics. And a lot of people know Fisher & Paykel Healthcare as a device manufacturer. I still get a lot of people asking me about their washing machines and dishwashers, but we are a separate company now. But over the last 5 years, it's been fascinating to see changes in the medical industry, which have meant it's so much more about data than it's ever been. So now for us, data management is equally as important as our products. And we offer cloud-based services and systems that allow insurance companies, healthcare providers, and patients to all access this information on demand. And we're accumulating millions and millions of nights of patient information. And some of these systems are really critical to our customers' healthcare. But my real job when I think about it is a product owner. And for any of those of you who are product owners in the room, I'm sure you know that that's a full-time job in itself. A bit about our journey, I guess. This is a photo here of what we call the Main Street corridor at F&P, and it kind of seemed appropriate for a journey. It seems like a long way if you're walking up and down there about 7 or 8 times a day. But Scrum came into F&P about 3 years ago, and it came in through software development. And at the time, we were having some really big challenges with our software. We had massive project overruns, and we're talking 2 and 3 times project overruns. And we had big cost overruns with the projects, well, because of that time, but also we had deep-seated quality issues. And we kept getting bugs coming out from the field with things that just shouldn't have had issues. And so we're looking around, a lot of leading New Zealand companies and overseas and saying, hey, there's got to be a better way. And we saw this thing called Scrum and heard the great results that people have been having, the 100% productivity increases, or hundreds of % productivity increases that you hear about. And we thought, hey, we could really benefit from some of that. So we started to put in place this process. And I won't call it Scrum, it would be insulting to Scrum to do that. But we had come from a very waterfall background. Being a medical device manufacturer in a very regulated industry, everything was about a process, and the process was supposed to guarantee a great product, right? It doesn't. And so we started to put in this process. It was a Scrum-like process where we broke items down into little bits that we called backlog items. We put them in a list that we called a backlog, and we worked in iterations that we called sprints. But what we found is that process made us faster, but it made us faster at being very average. In fact, it probably made us faster at being a little bit worse. And that kind of brings me to my first lesson that we learned through this Agile journey, is that Agile is much more than a process. We had picked up this framework, but the framework really only succeeds if you really buy into the other part, which I kind of call the Agile philosophy. And it's made up of a set of values like openness and transparency in front of the business. Courage, having the guts to really stand up and have those hard conversations as a team and with each other. Respect for each other, respect for the business. Focus, and this was a big one we missed. We missed the point that Agile's all about focusing on where the primary value is for a business. What I really think is the most important one is commitment. It's about a team really buying into that belief that actually we're paid here to achieve an outcome. And we're going to make a commitment to the business that over the next couple of weeks, we will achieve what we promised. Come hell or high water, we're going to pull out all the stops that we can control to actually achieve that. And with that philosophy as well goes this concept of inspecting and adapting. And I really believe that this is the lifeblood of Agile. It's what really makes it work, is when you're constantly looking back at yourself and seeing what had gone wrong. And we had been going on for 6 months with the Scrum-like process and failing, and we'd never stopped to look back and ask ourselves that question. And once we did start to inspect and adapt, that's when things started to improve. I mean, we sat down and had a really good hard look at these values and how we kind of reflected to them. And what came out of that was this motto, and we didn't make it up, we stole it, but it was that we will not compromise as a team, and the team made a commitment to that. And it sort of came with this funny slogan, which was, I did it. And it was this motto that came out that if you weren't willing to put your photo on the work you'd done, hold that up on a billboard in front of all your customers, all your stakeholders and all your friends, and for them to know it was you, it wasn't done. And it shouldn't be being put out. And just from that simple concept, the level of ownership took off. It was amazing. We started seeing people taking a real pride in the work they were doing, real ownership in the work they're doing. And if we did have problems, people were there to see it through. And that was really the point when we started to get this productivity increase back. I think the best example of that agility, that inspection and adaptation is the military. And I use a special forces unit. And you know, these guys have a team and they have a goal. And there's a whole lot of unknown terrain between them and their goal. But they have to continually inspect and adapt with whatever they come up against to overcome it. They don't know what it's going to be, but their job is to get to that goal in the most efficient and effective way possible. And we've seen Agile just really sweep through F&P. It's been exciting to see, and it started in software, but we use it for things now like electronic systems development. Mechanical systems development have started to use it. All our production processes are now lean. And more recently, I've been talking to finance and accounting about starting to use Agile in those areas and for project management. And watching each of these teams start to implement Agile has been fascinating, because the teams that really succeed are the ones that have taken those values on first and are regularly inspecting and adapting. They're being honest with each other and holding each other up to those values. So the journey for us really started with picking up this framework. And we found the framework was okay, but really all it did is made us faster at being average. You know, there is some value in breaking down work. And after 6 months, we brought in some outside help, and we thought, hey, you know, something's going wrong here. And we did start to inspect and adapt. And as we did, we slowed down. But we found that as we slowed down, we were delivering true value. It was focused and real quality. And then from there, we continued to inspect and adapt, and we got faster and faster at being better. And I really believe that a team that can do this becomes like that elite special forces unit where they can conquer the world. You know, no obstacle becomes too much for a team that's really agile to just be able to adapt and overcome. And that really brought me to the biggest challenge for myself, which was, as a product owner, once you've got a team that can conquer the world, a huge amount of responsibility comes on you to make sure that the world you're conquering is actually the right one. And it caught me off guard a little bit because the team started to accelerate, and I just wasn't ready to be able to give the inputs to them that they needed. And it really highlighted to me the importance of having a product vision. And I think as a product owner, you know, your job is to really understand how your product contributes to the value of your business, and then communicate and empower others with this vision. And I think of that vision as a sketch on the back of a napkin. You know, it's not a fully rendered blueprint. Blueprints only work in projects like construction. You know, when we've got problems that have been solved before, when there are methods to solve problems and we can iterate those methods. But in the space that we live as technologists, we're bumping up every day against problems that maybe no one's ever seen before. And we're having to constantly inspect and adapt to overcome those problems. And I've talked to people in product ownership who say, you know, in Agile, you can't have a vision because you kind of find out what your product's going to be as you go along. And I say that's great. You know, Agile empowers you to create a product that's going to be most suitable for your customer. You may not even know who they are. But at each point along the way, while you may not know what your product might be, you should have a really, really good idea of what it could be, because that's what you're going to be able to empower the team with. And secondly, as a product owner, it's so important to be engaged. And I often laugh that, you know, sometimes I spend more time in the market meeting customers than our marketing people do, because I find it so valuable just to have that contact with customers and to really be able to understand what their needs are and how we're meeting them, but also to be part of the team. And you know, a Scrum team's made up of those three people. It's made up of a Scrum Master, a team, and a product owner. And I really don't believe that a product owner can go to a planning session and deliver this backlog of work to a team and then come back at a review and expect to hold a team accountable for the work they've done if they haven't been there throughout the process. Because a great product is much more than the sum of its stories. There's so much context that's really carried in between the lines that it's your responsibility to hold as a product owner. And you really need to be there on a daily basis communicating that context. And what you're doing by doing that is effectively unblocking the team. You're allowing them to move forward at each step where they've got a question and making sure that they are actually creating the most value for the business. And as a kind of check whether I'm doing a good job with this, I often ask myself a couple of questions. And the first one is, do they understand why we're doing what we're doing? And the second one is, do they understand what value it will add? They're kind of hard to answer, but a simple way of doing it is to set someone up to see if they could market it to someone else. So if we've got a customer coming in, or if we've got another stakeholder in the business, I'll sometimes set up one of the members in the team to have to present it. And you can sit back and watch that presentation, and it's fascinating because within about 2 minutes, you know straight away whether they've got the vision for the product or not. And it's quite a good check. And also, I think as an organisation too, it's really important to give product owners the time it needs. Because in carrying this vision for a product, the product owner is going to be so influential in what the product ends up being. And a lot of times it's seen almost as an extra responsibility rather than a full-time job. And to really take a product from being good to great, I think an organisation would do well to invest a lot of time and give that to their product owners so they can really spend the time to understand the domain and communicate that vision to their teams. One of the really big challenges I find on a day-to-day basis managing our portfolio at F&P is bringing everyone into line with that vision. It's all well and great to have that and to know really strongly where the product needs to go, but it's the day-to-day things that come up, like a salesperson running in saying, hey, I just spoke to this doctor and they really, really need this report. It's going to sell them a whole lot more CPAPs from this particular doctor. Or a marketing person coming over and saying, I've just been to a conference somewhere and we need to be crowdsourcing or something else. And how do you bring all these people into line with a really common vision of your product? Because one of those responsibilities as a product owner is to make sure the team's focusing on items of highest value. And a really simple tool that I've found to do that has been to make it objective. And we call them our 3 pillars for a product. And we've started to come up with this and really get this agreement at the beginning where we'll have a vision statement for a product. So for one of ours, it's something like making our customers' sleep business more profitable through the use of F&P product. That's what defines what we're trying to achieve. And then we'll come up with 3 pillars that sit underneath that. And these 3 pillars define how the product does it. So it might be prioritising access to information that's going to affect revenue. And then every request that comes in, you can hold them up against those 3 pillars. And straight away, you've now got an objective discussion with someone in the business where you can say, well, actually, here's our backlog right now. Here's the pillars that we agreed, and you still agree they're correct, right? And is this more or less important than what's on there at the moment? And you can iterate this kind of vision, but it gives a really powerful tool, I think, for a product owner to be able to calibrate what's coming in. And then once you have this really great vision and this really, everyone's on board with what the product's going to be, the next challenge that I found personally was putting this into a backlog that was going to be really effective for the team. Scrum gives us a couple of tools for this. We've got stories, which are a piece of work that's kind of comfortable to drink, if you like. And then there's epics, which are just too big to handle. It's kind of like drinking from a fire hose. It's going to blow you away. And what we found is that by breaking things down as small as we could, we would get the most value out of our Scrum metrics. And we started to be able to really predict how projects were going to go. And we got this real efficiency in how we were delivering it as well. But the challenge with that is as we broke it down smaller and smaller, we lost the context of what the real goal was. So the team would be working down in these tiny stories and kind of miss out on what the bigger game was there. And a really classic example was one when we were building a reporting system. And we probably delivered 30 or 40 stories in making up this reporting system. And I went to my product manager and go, hey, we've got a releasable product for you this month. It's great. We've got all that reporting system done. And he turned around to me and he goes, Ben, that's fantastic. I can see you've done a lot of work, but I really want a button where people can download a PDF. And I'm not willing to give it to my customers unless I've got the download a PDF button. and it was probably about a one-day job for someone to put it in. But because we had been working down at the level of these stories, we'd lost sight of maybe the wider context of what would make that a marketable feature. And what's been really valuable to start using is something called themes, which is where you can gather a collection of stories and essentially put a rubber band around them with a tag that quantifies the value that that story delivers in terms of marketable value. And I've actually come to a point now where I start my backlog off with themes. So when I'm building a backlog, I'm thinking, what are we actually trying to deliver to market? Let's put those in there first. And then through the process of grooming and through some other processes I'll show you soon, you start to build out the stories that are actually going to make up the delivery of that theme to market. And it was great to see sprint goals come into the latest iteration of Scrum, because I think that wraps up a similar idea, where you've got to keep that high-level context in sight of really what you're trying to achieve, so you don't end up building a whole lot of little bits of work and missing sight of the greater goal. And looking beyond the backlog as far as trying to build out this really great backlog that creates a really great product. And one of the kind of phrases that we came up with was, a great product is much more than the sum of its stories. And a backlog of items can often define what a product will be. But there's that other side to making a really fantastic product, which is all about how it's going to achieve that. And what kind of experience are you going to create for your users? Because you can have two products that do exactly the same thing, but the success of those products can be vastly different depending on how they actually achieve it. And so we look at this as having another stream here, which we call experience. And we run this in an agile way as well, where we'll iteratively develop the experience. The experience designers are looking at those themes coming up in the backlog, and they're picking them off, and they're starting to develop the experience that defines that theme. And that feeds the stories back in for what that's going to be. And by approaching experience, we'll do a design, we'll test it with a user, we'll inspect and adapt. We'll do another design, we'll test it with a user, we'll inspect and adapt. And we're able to actually optimize how we're going to deliver that theme, so we know up front it's going to be most usable. And the fantastic thing about doing that on paper beforehand, before you start writing code, is you can do 100 more iterations in the same amount of time, and it's way cheaper. And so you know that once you've defined your theme and you're going to commit to implementing it, it's at least had some upfront work done to know it's going to work in a really great way. And the next stream that sits in parallel with this too is architecture. And I'm a firm believer that architecture can evolve over time, but at the same time you want to be looking at the next few themes coming in your backlog and making sure you're considering what direction that's taking the architecture of your product in. And so we allocate a percentage of time each sprint to our architects to do that. Our architects are embedded in the Scrum teams, but they spend maybe 20% of their time in a sprint or 15% of their time just looking ahead and starting to try and define what the architecture is going to be for things coming up. And again, that feeds back to the backlog. So by starting with a theme and using this experience and architecture development process, we're actually defining what the stories that make up that theme are and still keeping the context of marketable value. And once that work's complete, that really defines what our definition of ready is for a particular theme to go into development. Which really brings me to the last lesson that we've learned over the 3-year journey in Scrum, and that's the importance of what I've heard called the project before the project. I remember we would often just run gung-ho into Scrum for a project and start doing sprints on it, and we had never stopped at the beginning to think about how can we set this project up to be most efficient and to have the greatest success. And I always think of the project before the project kind of like building the border of a puzzle. If you open a puzzle box and start to try and just put the pieces together without having the border done, it becomes really hard and it's really inefficient. You're going to spend a lot more time trying to figure out where those pieces go. But if you'd spent 5 minutes at the start, found all the flat ones, put them all together in a frame, you've now set yourself up to be able to fill in the middle way quicker. And the backlog for this project before the project, I think is 5 things. It's coming up with that vision for your product. Knowing what your goal is, what you're trying to achieve, and communicating it to that to your team and getting the real buy-in. It's coming up with a backlog for your project. It's coming up with the first few themes that you're going to plan on delivering. And then starting this experience process and this architecture process to develop stories for what those themes are going to be. So you have a foundation of a backlog before you start. But the last and probably the most important part of this project before the project is setting up your process so your feedback cycle is minimized. Because the more regularly you can inspect and adapt during a project, the more capable you are going to be to change and direct your project really towards where the most value is. And some tools we've found that have been really helpful in minimizing this feedback cycle, and one I'm sure a lot of people are using is continuous integration. And I don't know, how many people are using continuous integration at the moment with software projects? Yeah, it's most of the room. But this is where you have a computer sitting in the corner somewhere running some software. These are 5 that are available. We use Visual Studio Team Foundation Server. And each time you check in your code, the continuous integration system automatically builds that code and runs all the tests. And it means that you're catching errors that come up straight away, rather than waiting 6 months down the track and then you found, oops, I broke something that was already existent in the code. And it gives you that really tight feedback loop. So every time you check in, you know your integration's going to run and you know you're getting some testing on it. And some of these are free, so some of them give you a few projects for free and then you can pay for. But I'd highly recommend setting it up. They're very, very easy to set up. But we found most of these things have kind of a web interface to them to inspect and see what's going on. And we found that while we actually got this in place and got all our tests running, and that was great, we're having continuous testing going, the build would still break and it would still be a week before anyone looked at the website. And a really practical, and I can see some smiles and some nods, a really simple solution was to go and buy a $150 tricolor USB light. And we put this on a post, stuck it in the middle of the cluster of the development team, and Jace, one of the guys in the team, wrote some code to link it to TFS, and it's green if everything's good. As soon as a test fails, it goes orange, and if the build breaks, it goes red. And straight away, someone sees it and can intervene, and if they don't intervene, I'll see it, and then they'll intervene. And the great thing about that is it took that broken build time down from maybe weeks in some cases to minutes, because it just made it so visible. And if anyone's interested in where to get these from or want the source code for it, I'm more than happy to share it. So email me at the end and I'll send through the details. The other thing that can really set you up to minimize your feedback cycle is automated testing. And continuous integration is really only as valuable as the amount of automated tests you have in there. And I think investing in a good suite of unit and integration tests and software as you're building new stuff always pays dividends later on. It gives you the ability to have control of things that are going into your software and know the state that you're in as far as quality goes. And that was something that we kind of learned as our projects went on, that we've started really prioritizing developing these unit and integration tests now, just because they pay back so many times. Also having a strategy for how you're going to run user acceptance testing. And there's a lot of really cool tools available for doing this, but one we've just started using is Microsoft Test Manager. And again, about kind of reducing your feedback cycle, MTM allows you to run an app in a test container. So your testers still use the app, but it's got this little bar that runs along the side. And what it actually does is it records trace logs. So it's recording a code trace as the app's going along, so you're capturing any exceptions that would occur in code. It's also recording a video of what they're doing and allowing them to make comments and screenshots. And it means that if something does fail and come back to development, the amount of time you spend trying to resolve it is now massively shortened because you've got access to the actual debug log. You can walk through the code and set breakpoints and walk back and forward and actually see how it failed at the point it failed. And anyone who's got MSDN, you've probably got access to this kind of stuff already. And finally, a tool that we've just started to experiment with is Selenium. And is anyone here using Selenium at the moment? Okay, there's maybe 20% of the room. And this has been fantastic too, because it allows you to actually test your user interface in the same way that you'd write unit or integration tests. And I know Microsoft gave user interface testing a really bad name with their coded UI tests. It was horrible. But Selenium, they've managed to do it in a very simple way, and it's essentially just using CSS selectors to pick things that are on the page. You can automate your UI and start to get some continuous testing on the UI. And then the last kind of factor of setting this up to get a really short feedback cycle that we've started to look at is automated deployment. And this tool is one that we've been using. It's a tool by Redgate. It's called Deployment Manager, but there's others available too. I'm not sponsored by them, by the way. But it allows you to automatically deploy a build that's run on your continuous integration server to a pre-production environment and even to a production environment for testing. So it means that after you check in your code, it's minutes, literally, until the testers have a system available that they can actually log in to test. And no humans had to be involved there. So again, you've cut down the amount of work and the amount of time it's taken for you to be able to start testing that software and get some feedback. And then at the point that you want to deploy to production, you literally click a button and go send from staging to production, and it will deploy it in exactly the same way. So you're guaranteed to have consistency between your deployments, staging to production. So that really brings me to the end. So in retrospect, to kind of wrap up, those 3 lessons for us was really buying into Scrum being more than a process, and that philosophy of inspecting and adapting being almost the lifeblood of any agile process. Making sure that you have a vision as a product owner and that you're really communicating it effectively. And spending some time at the start before you really start rushing into an agile project to set up your environment to be successful and ensure that you've got the shortest feedback cycle possible. There's my contact details. Feel free to email me if you want any information, if you want about the tools, if you want the source code for the light, or else I'm happy to take some questions.